Hi, and welcome to Intentism Shows, the official podcast of the Intentism movement. My name is Vittorio Pelosi and I'm your host. Well, let's kick off with Can I Have Your Intention Please? This is something that we have every podcast where we try and keep you abreast of what's happening in the news and its relationship to intentionalism. Well, what's been in the news? Well, I like to look at the Me Too movement, something that's been around for a number of years now, and has been very important to look at the problems with the hierarchical structure in society and the abuses, particularly the abuses with certain males and the privilege that certain males have, and the power that certain males have, and the way it's been abused, particularly sexually. Now, a lot of people have been shown to have fallen short in this area, but I'd like to look at two. Not to moralize, but to look at the theory of intentionalism and this particular movement. So, Bill Cosby and Michael Jackson. Some people are arguing that they can't watch or listen anymore to Bill Cosby, The Cosby Show, or his stand-up comedy, or listen to Michael Jackson because of their lifestyles. Now, I wrote an unpublished article for the New York Times recently about it, and I'll reference it today. You can read it on our official website, www.intentism.org. The whole thing's there. Here's a quote. As a musical author, does Michael Jackson's life have any repercussions on his work? Did what he intended the work to mean make a difference? Do we continue listening to Michael Jackson or not? If the author is dead, then we have no debate. The irony is that a theory that promised the birth of the reader or listener has removed our ability to engage at all. You see, we can only have the discussion that's all over the internet, if the author is relevant. If the author has died, if we believe on Roland Barthes when he wrote The Death of the Author in 1967 that the author is dead and all we have is the reader, the viewer, and the text, then what does it matter about the lifestyle? However heinous that lifestyle is, it doesn't matter. It shouldn't reflect in the work, and we should be able to separate the work and still enjoy the work itself. Now, I'm not saying you should stop listening to Michael Jackson, phenomenal entertainer, brilliant man, or Bill Cosby, very talented comedian. I'm not saying you should or you shouldn't, but we can only have this discussion if we believe that authorship, intention, but particularly authorship, biography and authorship matters, and it's relevant to the creative work that you then produce. Something else, as a PS, as a postscript. Some people say we can continue to listen to the work, watch the work, read the work, if the work is very good. We can continue listening to Michael Jackson because he was one of the greatest performers of the 20th century. We can continue listening to Bill Cosby because he was a genius, a comic genius. Well, intentism is not about quality of work, but about meaning. It's about the properties of the work that we understand to make meaning. The epistemological qualities of the work. That's what we focus on. What does it mean? How can we get to some sense of meaning, whether it's a static meaning or fluid meaning? What is meaning? How can we get to that? However, Paisley Livingston, an intentist and a very, very prominent intellectual giant, he's written a host of books. He's a philosopher that has written multiple books, including Art and Intention. And in Art and Intention, he says, and he quotes another philosopher here, that a realized great intention, a great intention that's manifest successfully in the work, is better than a realized meager or poor intention. So in that sense, we can judge quality. But intentism is primarily meaning rather than deciding whether a work is particularly good or bad. Livingston's quote, however, does beg the question, if realized great intentions are better than realized meager intentions, cannot great art be through an accident where there is no intention, but it's still great? Well, what I like to suggest in passing, but there's a lot more to say to this, is that if you create something by accident, you need to recognize it. And maybe the art community recognizes it, but very often the artist recognizes it, and if he's skilled, he leaves it alone. He knows that that accident was better than what he was trying to do and planning to do. So in that sense, through the editing process, the intention is still holding fast. He intends to keep it through editing. That's how a lot of photography is done, that the photographer might take multiple snaps, still with a meta grand intention, but then in the editing process, looking at the contact sheet, he'll choose what photographs he would like to publish. Okay, let's look at our second theme today, our second part of the show, and we always have this critical corner where we try and have a little gaze, a little look at some area of theory in relationship to intentionalism. And I'd like us to dig a little bit deeper in what we've been talking about with intention and whether we can look at the lifestyle of an artist and include that in how we look at the work, how we read the work. And I'd like to focus on two very important, very critical thinkers, namely Martin Heidegger and Jacques Derrida. I believe that Martin Heidegger has a parallel to Cosby and Jackson in his lifestyle in one area. And secondly, the example of Derrida's life and a particular moment in Derrida's life shows that killing the author, the demise of the author, the death of the author can lead to hypocrisy. So Martin Heidegger and Jacques Derrida. Well, who are they? I will give you a very brief summary of these great people. If the father of postmodernism arguably was Nietzsche, a contender for the crown after him quite possibly was a German philosopher, Martin Heidegger. He wrote a very brilliant, opaque book called Being and Time, which is very, very hard to understand, with great complex ideas that revolutionized continental European philosophy. And Heidegger spoke of something called the fusion of horizons. The fusion of horizons. It was a term originally coined by Gadamer, who wrote extensively about art, in Truth and Method. Now let me give you a definition of the fusion of horizons, because it's a very, very critical concept that seemed to explode in how we understand artwork or any kind of creative work since then. And let me read to you a definition. The fusion of horizons. People come from different backgrounds, and it is not possible to totally remove oneself from one's background. History, culture, gender, language, education, etc. to an entirely different system of attitudes, beliefs, and ways of thinking. People may be looking for a way to be engaged in understanding a conversation or dialogue about different cultures, and the speaker interprets texts or stories based on his or her past experience and prejudice. Therefore, hermeneutic reflection and determination of one's own present life interpretation calls for the unfolding of one's effective historical consciousness. During the discourse, a fusion of horizons takes place between the speaker and listeners. Effective history is a very prominent theme both in Gadamer and Heidegger. So we've got this idea that we have a fusion of horizons in our lives and with the work. And what that implies is that our life has a horizon. It's no fixed point. We're fluid in many ways, in our ideas and in what we believe and what we understand, how we think. Everything about us is fluid. And the work is fluid as well in how it's interpreted and understood in different generations and different contexts. There is an echo for this in Stanley Fisher's ideas of interpretive communities, that the meaning is not found in an individual reader, but it's found in interpretive communities, however you define that, whether it's a place or a generation. But this is something similar. So we have these horizons, and when they meet happily, there is this fusion of horizons, and that's the best way of knowing that there's understanding or interpretation has taken place. Meaning in some capacity, in some definition, has taken place when there's this fusion of horizons between the speaker and the listeners. Well, have a look carefully at this definition. Let me read the beginning of it again. People from different backgrounds people come from different backgrounds, and it is not possible to totally remove oneself from one's background, history, culture, gender, language, education, to another different system in the text, in the artwork, of attitudes, beliefs, and ways of thinking. You can't divorce yourself entirely, and that's obviously clear. And I think this was understated before Heidegger and Gadamer, and we need to understand that. We never come to a work without baggage. We never come to a work entirely objectively. And there are good reasons for this, and there are good arguments of how this doesn't throw away entirely our ability to get to grasp a text accurately. We'll never grasp it omnisciently, but we can grasp it well enough to understand the text's meaning and primarily the intention of the creator's meaning. But note that there's this issue, this kind of friction here. So Heidegger is saying, look, I have baggage that relates to my work, and I have baggage as a viewer or a reader in my interpretation of your work. The trouble was that recently we discovered Heidegger's black notebooks. Heidegger had these black notebooks that extensively showed that he was a Nazi and National Socialist sympathizer. So, what do we make of that? Do we say that the work is cut off from the author, from the intention, and we can enjoy and praise his text and his philosophy and his ideas and not be worried about his sympathizings of Hitler? Or do we say, I don't like the man, there's a problem here, and it might relate to whether I continue reading his books, like do we continue listening to Michael Jackson, or do we continue watching the Cosby Show? The problem is, a lot of people that love Heidegger and love the continental philosophers that came through him and would say, yes, the author has died, they are uneasy about Heidegger, knowing that Heidegger had these sympathies. So where do you draw the line? Either the author is dead or he isn't. Can we just smile and look at Heidegger's work and say it doesn't matter what he was like as a person? It's hard to do so. Second, Derrida, Jacques Derrida, very, very famous French philosopher. He was very powerful and very influential in many areas. He was greatly influenced by Heidegger, and one of his great concepts was deconstruction. Now, deconstruction is when you turn texts in on themselves to find areas that run counter to intention or structural unity. You draw them together, and you turn them in on themselves, and you'll find these discrepancies, these issues, where the unity is not there anymore, it's lost. And it runs counter to how we understand the intention of the writer. Well, let me give you an example where there seems to be some hypocrisy in his life. Great man, but how does he live by his theory? Well, incensed by a critical essay about his interpretation of Austin, Derrida's interpretation of Austin, Derrida once wrote an essay entitled Limited Inc. Incorporation ABC to Professor John Searle. So John Searle was critiquing Derrida's understanding of Austin. He was saying he didn't get Austin. Derrida misunderstood Austin. That was what John Searle wrote. Now, Derrida could say that when you are disagreeing and critiquing my work regarding Austin, you could say that's fine, because you are looking at the text and you are deconstructing the text and turning the text in on itself. You are making sure the text run counter to my intention. You are showing the structural problems and disunity in the text. But what did Derrida do? Derrida then said that John Searle, had misunderstood his theories, and note this is the most important bit. Not only did he misunderstand his theories, but his theories should have been understood by him. His theories should have been understood by him. So that's saying that the theories should have been clearly manifest and presented in the work. His intentions were clear in the text. the way he transcribed his theories were clear in the text. Those two things that deconstruction says are not there in texts. His intention was clear, and the unity, the clarity of how he spoke about those intentions were clear. Whereas deconstruction finds areas that run counter to intention or structural unity. So there are issues. It's very easy to say that the author is dead. It's very easy to say that the author is clearly dead because we can't get to the author. The author has died. We can't interview the author. We can't read any maybe textbooks or diaries or texts rather or diaries or notes from the author because they don't exist. It's very easy to say even if the author is still alive and has notebooks, etc., etc. It's very easy to say that we don't fully grasp them because of the diffusion of horizons, that I'm bringing baggage to the text, to the interviews. That means I can't fully understand what the author is trying to get at in what he's saying. It's very easy to say that the author doesn't understand what he's doing. If you look at, as we said briefly before, if we look at Dreams by Freud in 1900 and how psychoanalysis broke down how we understood ourselves and whether we truly grasp what we're trying to do at all. It's very easy to do this, and there's a lot of truth in these things. And how we understood the linear understanding of authorship to work and to meaning was blown apart, rightly so, because it's more complicated than that. But can you see, if you could deconstruct everything and say the author not is sometimes to be challenged or sometimes misunderstood, but the author is dead, you can see that logically it often doesn't work, and in practice that's not how we behave. We behave wanting to be understood. We behave wanting to know the intention very often. Not always, but very often, of the people that we engage with. We're interested in the context. We don't like the idea of misunderstanding somebody. We believe that you can misunderstand because we believe there is something to be understood. Okay, let's look at practice makes imperfect. Well, we have, with intentism, we have a filmmaking arm, and that's called With Intent Films, and we're very excited about this. And the most recent short film relates to intention. The premise was to create a finished short film that focuses on the creative process. Well, how did we do it? We hired 3 actors, and we didn't tell them anything about the project before they arrived. And when they arrived, we gave them a seat, and we gave them each a little envelope. And in that envelope, it told them what the process was going to be for this first stage, just the first stage, nothing after that. And they weren't able to communicate with the other 2 actors. And in the envelope, in the little letter, it said that we are going to make a film without a script. And for them as actors to discuss whether that would work, what would be some of the difficulties, what would be some of the things that would be more interesting about making a short film without a script. Then we said you can talk, and they discussed this idea, this project, the 3. And while they were doing this, we filmed a talking head of one of the actors. Then, after that 10-minute conversation, that conversation was typed up and became the script. We invited the 3 actors back again. They didn't know what the second stage would be. And we sat them down and they had a read-through of the script. They hadn't seen it before, no rehearsals, a read-through of the script that was actually their spontaneous conversation earlier on. This time we recorded a second actor, talking head, reading the same lines that he had said or she had said very naturally a week or 2 prior. Then we gave them the script and we said, go away, learn it as well as you can. And then they came back and we rehearsed, got it as well rehearsed as possible. They learnt the lines. We tried to give them some ideas of how to say the lines, to say it in a way that was natural and engaging. And then we recorded the 3 of them saying the lines off by heart, off book, without the script. And we recorded a talking head of the final actor. Then we got these 3 talking heads and we edited it. Now, just to bear in mind, one thing that I failed to mention is every time we invited them back to the same place, the same location, same lighting. And then we edited those 3 talking heads so it sounded as if it was the same original conversation. However, one of the speakers that was filmed first comes across as a little bit more spontaneous, a little bit more natural, maybe with a few full starts, but very natural, because he was speaking spontaneously and naturally at the very beginning. The second person who was filmed, the talking head, even though she was reading from her own natural speech, appeared a bit more formulaic, a bit more mechanical, a little bit more formal, because it was a read-through and they hadn't read it before. They knew the lines because they remembered they probably said those lines, but they were reading the lines line by line, word by word, linearly. So it was mechanical. The third came across as a little bit too polished. But you could see the journey in one work, because that's the interesting thing we have as intentists. We're interested in engaging the viewer in artworks that are interested in not just the final piece, but this creative journey. This creative journey of the artist, from a grammatical intentism or intention to these micro-intentions, to the final intention of what? The final intention is to intend no more. And we often call it the creative trail. So like somebody might go on a trail and leave bits of breadcrumbs or bits of paper for somebody to follow after him and find out where he's going and be led somewhere. In artwork, through sketches, through interviews, through all these different things, you can trace, however imperfectly, the creative trail from beginning to end. And we want to do that somehow in the work. It's a problem because the work, by definition, is the finished work. So how do you have the process in the finished work? It's no longer the process, if you can see it, it's the work. So this With Intent film tried to engage with that idea in that we have one conversation, one short film, but in that short film, each actor represents, in fact more than represents, is one stage of the three-part stage of creating the film. Okay, thank you so much for watching, or for listening, if you're listening as a podcast audio. Just as a postscript, every so often we'll reply to the listeners out there, the viewers out there, and I'd like to thank Mark Smith for his comments on the first video, and here are some of them. Do people want to know the intention? Because we were saying that it's important to understand the intention because people naturally want to know. So do people want to know the intention? Should art be a history lesson? And are external gestures always for other people? Can you unconsciously expect something? So several very good questions. I'd like to talk about several of them, but we run out of time really. The first one I'll briefly touch on, then I'll spend a bit more time on the third one. So do people want to know the intention? I would say that very often yes, but not always. I would think that sometimes we consciously want to know the intention. Other times we unconsciously do, because we are not just listening to the words of someone speaking, for example, but we look at body language and we look at all these sort of things that are the baggage that helps us to understand the words. And one of them would be understanding the intention. I'll give you an example. It's a delicate example because it regards to somebody who was quite inflammatory and controversial, and that's George Bush. Now, George W. Bush, in various speeches he would give, occasionally would wink at some parts of the speech. Now, a lot of people were offended by that, and maybe quite rightly, because of his position as President of America, delivering an important, serious speech. However, I did read, now this may be wrong, I did read that in the southern states of America, Texas and where he's from, that winking like that is not a sign of cocksuredness, arrogance, as it might come across to people in Europe and elsewhere in the world, but it's something related to his culture as just being friendly. Now, that may be not true, number one. It may be stupid for George Bush to be doing that because it may be misinterpreted and misunderstood in speeches as well, number two. However, we do need to say that if it is true that it's something that is related to his culture, and so his intention was not to say, I'm cocksured, I'm arrogant, I'm the commander-in-chief, listen to me, but was his way of just being friendly. If that's true, it may not be true, but if it's true, then that is something that we need to be aware of if we're trying to understand what he was trying to come across as and what he was trying to say. Now, we may be aware of our concern for intention, or it may be subconscious. But I think we generally do that a lot of the time, but not always. However, I do believe that the intention, even if we're not seeking it, is always important in understanding the meaning of whatever creative gesture is made. So that's how I would put it, that we sometimes so often do, look for the intention. We sometimes subconsciously look for intention as the package of all the other things that relate to the human gesture. But always it's relevant. It's always important, whether we are consciously trying to grasp it or not. As for the third question of Mark, are external gestures always for other people? Well, by definition, yes. By maybe your definition of that expression, no. But intentists have structured that expression with a particular usage. And let me go back and explain that to you. We understand external gestures are for other people, at least in the generic sense, as in for the world. One of the big problems with the new critics that we looked at a couple of weeks ago is that we believe they've come to the party too late. They say that the meaning's only in the work. Well, let's stop and stand back for a second. There are many stages of creativity before the creative work. There are many stages. You can't jump in halfway through. First of all, there is an internal creative act. An internal creative act, which is an expression coined by the intentists to explain this, that there are thought processes all the time. Some of them are including intention to do something and others aren't. But there is an internal creative act. That's the first step in creating a work or a text to the world. Secondly, there's an external creative act. Now, note that we're saying act. This external creative act is when you choose to externalize what you're thinking internally, and it's in the world. But it's either intentionally private or unintentionally private, but normally intentionally private. So, for example, Samuel Pepys's diary was intentionally private because it was written in code. So he was creating an act in the world, but it wasn't a gesture to the world. So an external creative act in the world. Another example would be doodling. Now, doodling is not a conscious desire to hide something from somebody, but when you're doodling when you're bored, you're not normally doodling for an audience. So that would be an external creative act. Then thirdly, we can have external creative gestures. And this is when you externalize your internal creative act, but to, in a generic sense at least, the world. It's to be seen, even if there's no specific audience in mind. This is important because it demonstrates a complete journey that includes the mind from inception to the realizing of the work in the world. And thank you again, Mark, and keep the comments coming from everybody else. We'll try and mention some of them and engage with them. We get excited by that when audience members, listeners, watchers have ideas, because this is something that we believe we need to debate, because we believe that there is a way of understanding meaning that hasn't fully been realized by even some of the most prominent philosophers here. So keep them coming and we'll engage with your ideas in subsequent shows. So that's it. Keep watch. Please keep watch. Next time we'll look at how works can be classified as discriminatory and offensive if the artist's intentions are not known. They may be offensive, but sometimes they can be considered offensive when the artist's intentions are not known and they're misunderstood. And we need to look at the artist's intention to realize the mistake there. The offense wasn't deliberate, and therefore maybe the work can be offensive, but it can't be seen as offensive as a work that's intended to hurt and offend and abuse people. So we'll look at that, and we'll look at some good examples and some good theory behind that. And then in Critical Corner, we'll have a more detailed look at Gadamer and Martin Heidegger's fusion of horizons, and then something of very great interest called the hermeneutical circle, which is a better way of understanding text. If we have a horizon that we can never fully understand or grasp another text because of all the baggage, if we have a hermeneutical circle, which is another term, that it's suggesting that if the text or the work is in the center, we can never get to it because we're spinning around it, never getting closer to it because of all the baggage we have. Another way of looking at it that's been looked at by multiple people, including a man called Van Hooser, is to understand the hermeneutical circle as a hermeneutical spiral, in the sense that we will never get to know the work omnisciently, but we study and looking carefully at the work and any information we have regarding what the intention was for the artist or writer, we can slowly get closer and spiral in and get closer to the heart of the work. Please subscribe and like these videos, comment below with thoughts and anything you want to see discussed. Don't forget we have videos including 50 Intentist bites. They're often animated, but not always, 2 minutes long, touching upon a particular theme. And again, check out our website at www.intentism.com. Goodbye, thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.